You know, sometimes a single moment can change everything. An entire century can be defined not by a grand plan on a battlefield, but by a simple wrong turn on a sunny city street. We're going to talk about a single spark in a world that was just waiting to burn that ended up setting the entire globe on fire.
So let's set the scene. The date is June 28, 1914. We're in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, which back then was a province of the massive Austro-Hungarian Empire. It's just a peaceful, ordinary Sunday morning. People are out and about, and a royal motorcade is making its way through the city. It's a scene of perfect, fragile normalcy, but it's about to be shattered forever.
Out of the crowd steps a 19-year-old kid, a Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip. He pulls out a pistol and he fires just 2 shots, 2 tiny pieces of lead. Now, in that split second, 2 people are killed. But the real story is the impact of those 2 bullets. They would ripple outwards, way beyond that car, that street, that city, and eventually they would engulf the entire planet.
Those 2 bullets were the trigger for an absolutely unimaginable global catastrophe. Let's just look at the numbers. 17 million people killed, another 21 million wounded. 4 of the world's most powerful empires, the German, the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, and the Russian, would literally cease to exist. From their ashes, about 40 new countries would be born, completely redrawing the map of the world. And maybe the most chilling part of all, the so-called peace that ended this war would plant the seeds for a second, even more brutal world war just 21 years down the line.
17 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. It's a figure so huge it's almost impossible to really wrap your head around it. We're talking about an entire generation of husbands, sons, brothers, and fathers lost. Which brings us to the big question we're here to answer. So how on earth could the murder of one man, even a very important one, drag the whole world into a conflict of this scale? Well, the simple answer is, it couldn't. You see, the assassination wasn't the cause of the war. It was just the spark. The real problem was that the bomb, this giant powder keg of resentment, rivalry, and tangled alliances, had already been built over decades. It was just sitting there, waiting for a match. To really understand why the world exploded in 1914, we can't start there. We have to rewind the clock. Big wars like this are rarely accidents. They're the final result of years, sometimes decades, of simmering tensions and bad decisions. And our story really begins 44 years before that fateful day in Sarajevo. Okay, so back in 1871, the Franco-Prussian War ends with a crushing defeat for France. And to add insult to injury, the new German Empire is declared not in Berlin, but in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. France is also forced to give up the valuable territories of Alsace-Lorraine. For the next 40 years, getting revenge, or revanche, becomes the central obsession in France. Now, to counter this, the brilliant German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck builds this complex web of alliances to keep France isolated, which leads to the Triple Alliance in 1882. But then, in 1890, everything changes. A new, arrogant Kaiser, Wilhelm II, fires Bismarck and makes a catastrophic mistake. He lets Germany's key treaty with Russia expire. Russia, feeling nervous and isolated, does the logical thing. It turns to the one country that fears Germany just as much, France. By 1907, Great Britain joins them, forming the Triple Entente. And just like that, the stage was set.
So now you have a continent that's clearly split into 2 massive armed camps. On one side, you've got the Triple Alliance, later known as the Central Powers. That's industrial Germany, the sprawling Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Italy. And on the other side, you have the Triple Entente, the Allies. Great Britain with its global navy, a bitter France, and the huge Russian Empire. And the terrifying logic of this system was simple. An attack on one was an attack on all. It was basically a continent-wide tripwire, just waiting for someone to stumble.
And a few final ingredients made this whole situation even more explosive. First, a massive naval arms race. Germany started building a huge fleet to challenge Britain's dominance of the seas, which made London deeply suspicious. Second, you had a couple of diplomatic showdowns over Morocco, where the 2 sides nearly went to war, completely destroying any trust that was left. And finally, you had the most dangerous place in Europe, the Balkans. The Ottoman Empire, the so-called sick man of Europe, was falling apart, creating a power vacuum. Little nations like Serbia were dreaming of uniting their people, but many of those people lived inside the borders of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which saw Serbian nationalism as a deadly threat to its own existence. It was a tinderbox.
And that brings us right back to that car in Sarajevo. The man in the car was Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the entire Austro-Hungarian throne. Now here's the irony.
He was actually a reformer. He wanted to give more rights to the Slavic peoples in the empire. But for radical nationalists like Gavrilo Princip, reform was not enough. They wanted nothing less than the complete destruction of the empire.
Earlier that morning, another assassin had tried to kill the Archduke with a bomb, but it had bounced off the car and failed. The royal couple, incredibly bravely, decided to continue their visit. But then, history turned on a dime because of a tiny, tragic mistake. The driver of the Archduke's car took a wrong turn. When he was told to reverse, the car stalled, and it stopped right in front of a cafe where Gavrilo Princip was standing, thinking he'd failed. The car was just 5 feet away, a 1 in a million chance. Princip didn't hesitate, and in that moment, the fate of Europe was sealed.
What happened next was like watching a line of dominoes fall in slow motion, a catastrophic and unstoppable chain reaction. First, Austria-Hungary, backed by Germany, sends an impossible list of demands to Serbia. Serbia actually agrees to almost all of them, but it's not enough. On July 28th, Austria-Hungary declares war. The first domino falls. Then Russia, which saw itself as the big brother to Serbia, starts mobilizing its huge army. Germany sees this as a direct threat, so it declares war on Russia. That automatically pulls in France because of its alliance with Russia. Germany's war plan then required them to invade neutral Belgium to get to France quickly. And that final act, violating a neutral country, was the last straw for Great Britain. They declared war on Germany. In just 37 days, a local crisis had become a world war.
You know, every country went to war in August 1914 absolutely convinced it would be a quick and glorious victory. The soldiers were told they'd be home by Christmas. But they were all wrong. Germany's master plan for a quick knockout of France failed. The Allies managed to stop the German advance, and then both sides did the only thing they could. They dug in. And this created a massive, static line of trenches that stretched all the way from the Swiss border to the North Sea.
And the reality of this new kind of war was just horrifyingly pointless. Take the Battle of the Somme in 1916. As you can see on the screen, after months of some of the most brutal fighting in human history, the Allies advanced a maximum of 6 miles. And the cost for that tiny stretch of mud? Over 1 million men killed, wounded, or missing. This was the horror of industrial warfare. You had modern weapons like machine guns and heavy artillery being met with 19th century tactics. The result was just slaughter on a scale nobody had ever imagined. For years, this brutal deadlock dragged on. But in 1917, 2 massive events completely changed the game. First, a desperate Germany restarted its policy of unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking any ship heading to Britain, including American ones. That, plus a clumsy attempt to get Mexico to attack the U.S. in the infamous Zimmerman telegram, was the final straw. America declared war. At the exact same time, on the other side of Europe, the Russian Empire, totally broken by the war, collapsed into revolution. Russia pulled out of the war, which gave Germany one last, final chance to win. In the spring of 1918, Germany threw every last man and gun into one final, massive offensive on the Western Front. It came incredibly close to working, but ultimately it failed. With fresh American troops now pouring into France, the Allies launched a powerful counterattack, the 100 Days Offensive that finally broke the German army. Facing total military collapse and revolution at home, the German high command had no other choice. An armistice was signed. And at the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, after 4 long years of unimaginable slaughter, the guns finally fell silent. But the war didn't just kill millions of people. It shattered entire political systems, it destroyed ideologies, and it wiped empires off the map. The world of 1918 was almost unrecognizable from the world of 1914. The entire political map of Europe and the Middle East was about to be completely redrawn. Just look at this. 4 of the world's most powerful and ancient empires were completely gone. The German Hohenzollerns, the Austro-Hungarian Habsburgs, the Ottoman Sultans, and the Russian Romanovs. All of them gone. And in their place, you had this chaotic mass of new countries and new conflicts, which would set the stage for decades of instability to come.
So the victors all gathered in Paris to try and build a lasting peace. The result was the Treaty of Versailles, and it was meant to make sure a war like this could never, ever happen again. But it was a deeply flawed peace. It was designed to punish, not to heal. It forced Germany to accept 100% of the blame for the war. It took away their land, dismantled their military, and demanded crippling financial payments. Instead of healing the wounds, it created a deep and lasting poison of national humiliation and resentment inside Germany.
And one man saw exactly what was coming.
The Supreme Allied Commander, a French marshal named Ferdinand Foch, read the terms of the treaty and made this chillingly accurate prediction. He understood that this wasn't real peace. It was just a pause, a 20-year ceasefire before the fighting started again. And he was almost exactly right.
So, what is the ultimate legacy of the Great War? Well, it's a story of failure, isn't it? A failure of diplomacy, a failure of leadership, and really a failure of humanity. But more than that, it's a powerful warning that still echoes in our world today. If there is just one lesson we have to take away from this whole catastrophe, it's this. World War I shows us what happens when rigid, inflexible alliance systems leave no room for mistakes or diplomacy. It shows the danger of aggressive nationalism, when national pride becomes more important than peace. It proves that in a world that's already primed for conflict, a single mistake, a single wrong turn on a street in Sarajevo can be enough to set the entire world on fire.
They called it the War to End All Wars, a tragically optimistic name, because we know now it was anything but. So when we look at our own world today, with its complex alliances, its rising nationalism, and its own regional conflicts, we really have to ask ourselves, have we truly learned its lessons?